Nearly everyone expected that when the Bank of Canada started cutting rates, that a whole bunch of buyers would enter the market. But that isn't what happened in Toronto. In fact, the exact opposite happened. Listers, people trying to sell their properties, flocked to get their properties on the market as they expected buyers to show up, but it seems that those buyers just weren't there. And for one particular sector of the Toronto real estate market, things seem to be worse than they have been in a very, very long time. But before I get into all the details, my name is Nolan Matthias, and if you want the latest Canadian real estate and financial news, go ahead, hit the subscribe button and hit the like button so more people like you can see this video. And don't forget, you can still go to mortgagesecrets.ca and get my Mortgage Secrets book completely for free. All you have to do is pay the shipping and handling. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's jump into the Toronto real estate market update for July of 2024. And this one's quite interesting. And at the end of this video, I'm going to show you a secret stats package that I use in order to get more and better information than what we're getting from realtors and the Toronto Real Estate Board. So stay tuned if you want to see that, because there is some more specific information that I think many people need to see, and there is a reliable source for it that is some of the best in Canada. So let's start by taking a look at the Toronto real estate market. This is the TREB housing market package. Obviously, this comes directly from the Toronto Real Estate Board. It has quite a few really good stats in it, but some of them can be misleading if you don't understand exactly what they're saying. So I want to start first by looking at the TREB MLS sales. And this is going back to basically 2021. The blue line is 2021, the yellow line is 2022, gray is 2023, and red is 2024, or orange, depending on the settings of your iPhone or your computer screen or whatever you're watching this on. In fact, a lot of people actually watch this on TV, to believe it or not. We can see that in the YouTube analytics, but I digress. And what you're seeing here is that these sales, especially for the month of June, the month of May, the month of April, relative to the last 4 years, have been trending down and have been not significantly lower than they have been in the past, but definitely significantly lower than they were in 2021. And this is very much a trend, as you'll see a little bit later on. These sales in the Toronto real estate market are lower than what they have been for quite some time. And this is just something that is going to have to be faced by both buyers and sellers. But there's some ways that you can kind of determine whether it's a good time to buy or whether it's a good time to sell. And I'll show you that in a second. But moving on to the new listing numbers, and this is going to be the primary topic of this video. What you can see is that contrary to what's happening with the sales numbers, the new listing numbers are significantly higher right now than they've been in most of the previous years, especially when compared to 2023. In fact, the new listing numbers are approaching in May and June the numbers that we had in 2021 and 2022. So in other words, what we're seeing here, in fact, in June, they've exceeded those numbers. In other words, what we're saying is higher new listing numbers than what was available for sale in 2021 at the height of the market. Now, this is somewhat alarming because when we had all of those buyers basically fighting to buy all of these new listings, well, that was one thing. But now we've got the same amount of new listings, but seemingly not the same amount of buyers, because if we had the same amount of buyers, our sales numbers would be higher. Now, what this means is that there's more listings than buyers. And what that tells us is that there's going to be at least some sort of a correction in the price as sellers this time around get more competitive to sell their properties, which usually means lowering prices. Now, as we go a little bit further into the stats package, you can see the sales to new listing ratio. Now, the sales to new listing ratio is one of the best indicators for what is going to happen from a price standpoint in a real estate market. Basically, the lower this number is, the more likely housing prices are to go down, and the higher the number is, the more likely they are to go up. And as you can see, in December of 2021, the sales to new listing ratio reached almost 1.2, which meant there was a ton of competition for properties that were for sale. And this is where we saw the highest increases in the prices. Now what we're seeing is the sales to new listing ratio, other than for a couple of months at the end of last year, is the lowest that it's been since the beginning of the year. And what this means is that, again, we've got less competition for those houses that are coming up for sale. This is what's called a buyer's market. The tables have turned in favor of the buyers, which means there is going to be the opportunity, in all likelihood, for buyers to go out there, find properties that they like, and then go and make bids on those properties that are significantly less than what they're listed for, with an actual chance of getting these properties for less than what they're listed for. And then if we go last but not least here, and we look at the TREB MLS average price, this number is a little bit misleading because you can have properties in the low end that bring this number down and properties in the high end that bring this number up. But what this chart is showing us is that the prices are pretty much stable. Now, I can tell you that that isn't exactly the case, especially when you look at benchmark properties. The benchmark properties are actually going down in value. And what that means as a benchmark property is essentially the same type of property that's being measured over time rather than just a random sample of the entire market, which gives much more reliable data. Now, when you look at the sales data going back to the early 1990s, you can see that the sales numbers are some of the lowest that they've been. The one exception to that was early in the pandemic and around the 2008 financial crisis. But as of right now, we're starting to see those sales numbers drop. Now, this is where I start to get into my somewhat secret tool that I use to get more specific information on what's going on in the market. And this comes from a company called Edge Analytics. And this is done by Ben Rabideau, who has been a guest on the live show, the podcast, essentially on this channel. And he is one of the most intelligent researchers I've ever met, especially when it comes to the Canadian real estate market. And the report that he puts out is used by institutional investors to get a better feel of what's actually going on in the market. So the type of reporting he does is significantly more sophisticated than what's being released in general to the public. Now, in his report, he tends to look at several different things. One of them is the sentiment in the market, and he uses places like Facebook and Instagram and Twitter to see what's going on from a sentiment standpoint of view. Sorry, I think I tried to say a sentiment point of view there. And one of the things that caught my eye here was this chart from some guy named Robert Marsiglio. This would be a realtor in the Toronto area. But the reason why this caught my eye is because if you look at this post, he posted the new listings that came directly after June 5th, which was when the Bank of Canada cut interest rates by 0.25%. And it was the single biggest listing day of all of 2024. Now, what that tells us is that there was one major thing happening, and that was people who were looking to list their properties were waiting for the interest rate cuts, thinking that there were going to be buyers that came to the market and that if they listed at that point in time that they would have more likelihood of selling their property in a market that was going up. But those buyers never came. So really what happened is anybody who tried to time the market and list their property after the interest rate cut happened essentially found themselves in a place where they were in a significantly more competitive market. They actually would have been better off listing their property prior to that than they would have been if they tried to time the market. So, important lesson here, especially if you're looking at buying or selling a property, is sometimes what you think is going to happen because of the obvious isn't exactly what happens. And what you can see in general this year is that the new listing trend is increasing, and it's increasing quite substantially. Now, this is for all of Canada, not just the Toronto market. We already saw that the new listing numbers are quite high relative to the last couple of years. But Ben does a really good deep dive into what's going on in the Toronto market. And there's one sector of the market that is very much struggling. Now, Ben has some really good charts here. Some of these are contrary to what is shown in the TREB statistics. One that really caught my eye is the Toronto monthly house sales. This one is seasonally adjusted. And what it shows is that the sales numbers right now are significantly lower than they've been anytime going back to basically 2010. Now, that's an interesting number to me. But what's really, really interesting to me is the year over year change in Toronto home sales. Now, this is showing that condo sales, depending on what area you are looking in, the 416 or the 905, are down over 20%. Now, compare that to home sales, detached home sales, which are down about 12 or 13% in the 416, and in the 905 being down about a similar amount, but not quite as much as they are for condos. And what you can see here is that the condo market is definitely getting its butt kicked. And then this is where we get into more specific data. And this is why I like this report. And by the way, you can go to edgeanalytics.ca and you can get access to this report. It costs a small amount of money every single month, but it's worth every single penny. And when you start to look at single family home sales in the greater Toronto area, the black line with the dots here is the current numbers. And when you compare that pretty much going back to 2014, what you easily can see is that there's only been one time where the home sales were lower, and that was right at the beginning of the pandemic when we were all on lockdown. But the sales numbers are the lowest they've been in essentially almost a decade. And this is also true for condo sales if you look at this chart over on the right. And then if you take a look at this year over year change in new listings in Toronto, you can see that the new listings are up almost 34%, and then single family homes are up around 17 to 18%. And again, those numbers are huge, especially when you consider how many fewer sales there are. And a lot of the reasons for the increased condo activity on the listing side at least is all of these condos that are now coming to completion. And these are all the properties that everyone bought on pre-sales. And a lot of those people are now facing a scenario where they need to offload them either because they can no longer afford them, they're afraid of what they will do if they actually hold on to them, or they just never plan to own these properties anyways because they expected to have a huge increase in the value of them when they went to sell them the day they took possession of them. So now what's happening is all of this inventory is coming online, the buyers aren't there, and that is going to lead to an interesting few months for the Toronto condo market. But here's where it gets worse is there are more and more condos expected to come to completion in 2025. So this increase in inventory that's happening right now is just going to get worse and worse and worse. And you can see this in the cash flow analysis for these properties because back in 2020 and 2021, you could buy these and have a pretty reasonable expectation that these would cash flow. But when you look at them in 2023 and 2024, even when they are adjusted for principal paydown, well, a lot of these properties are now net negative when it comes to the amount of cash flow that they're going to be able to produce. And that's going to lead a lot of people to sell them because you don't want to basically catch a falling knife. And then last but not least, this is the graph that I think is the most telling, the active MLS listings. So the amount of listings that are available on the market, not the new listings, not the number of sales, but the number of listings that are available for sale. And what happens is over the course of several months, when you have a low sales to new listing ratio, you end up having inventory accumulate. And then the question is, what does that accumulated inventory look like relative to previous years? And as you can see, as of right now in the Toronto real estate market, it is the highest it has been in a decade. And that is a very scary number, especially with the lack of buyers that are coming to the market. So here's the reality of the Toronto real estate market. Now it is turning from a seller's market to a buyer's market, especially in the condo market. And what that means is if you're a bona fide buyer who's not looking to go out and buy a property as an investment and hope that you're going to get a massive return, but if you're somebody who needs a place to live and you want to buy a home for the sake of home ownership, there's going to be an opportunity in the next 3 to 6 months to buy a home, not at the list price and not compete with a whole bunch of other buyers, but at a price that makes more sense. Which means if you've been sitting on the sidelines waiting for a deal, now is the time where you're probably going to actually be able to get one. Now, that's not to say that the deals won't get better and better and better over time, but we do have an immigration issue with still a significant amount of people entering the country. And that could play an important role in propping up the Toronto real estate market. But at this moment, as Toronto condos are coming to completion and are flooding the market, there's going to be an opportunity to get a good deal on a good property that if you're buying with the long term in mind for a 5, 10, 15-year hold, you would probably be pretty happy to own. Oh, and if you want to get a really good deal on a property right now, you're going to need a good realtor. But if you want a great realtor, reach out to me via the link in the description below. We'd be happy to set you up with one of the best in the Toronto market. I don't take choosing a realtor lightly, and I want to make sure that when people choose a realtor, they're going to choose somebody who actually represents them and has the ability to say if a deal is not a good deal or it's not the right time to buy, don't buy, rather than just pushing somebody to purchase a property. So again, if you want me to hand select a realtor for you and refer you out, click the link in the description below. And by the way, if you want to see what's going on with interest rates, because there's some really good news on the fixed interest rate front, well, make sure to check out this video right here.